The last part of this book that then looks on space travel and could there be life on other planets. For a long time, we weren't sure whether our star, the sun, was the only star that had planets around it, and in fact, we thought we may never know the answer to that. Now, we could suppose that if they form in the same way and ours have planets, most of them are going to have planets, but no matter how powerful a telescope you would use, you would never be able to see planets around other stars. However, what scientists eventually were able to do were develop methods of indirectly detecting those planets. A couple of ways we can detect planets is if this is a star, now through a telescope, all you will see is a dot of light. But what we can do is measure the brightness, and if there is a planet orbiting that, what we would see is that periodically that planet's going to move in front of the sun or the star, and when that happens, it blocks out some of the light. So if we look at the light, if this is light intensity kind of here and this is time, it'll be steady, the light coming from the star, and then when the planet moves in front of it, it would dip down because some of that's getting blocked, and then it would be steady, and periodically we would see these dips due to the planet blocking out some of the light, and from that we can tell actually quite a lot about the planet. The other thing we can do is we can look at the light from the star, and what we see is that when planets move in front of them or move around a star, so if this is our planet, gravity pulls the star a little bit towards the planet in the same way the planet moves around the sun. And what that does is it causes the star to wobble a little bit, and we can detect that wobble from the light coming from a star, and therefore we know there must be a planet around it. On top of that, then what we can do is when the light from a star shines through a planet's atmosphere to get to us, if we have a star here and we have a planet here, the light from that star might just kind of pass through the atmosphere of that planet. The chemicals that are in that atmosphere will absorb certain frequencies of the light, and then when we detect that light, we can tell what chemicals are present in the atmosphere. Now that means we can detect things like water, so we know that it might be a suitable planet for life, but we can also detect some of the chemicals that are produced by life. So for instance, things like methane tend to be produced by life. It's short-lived as well, so it has to constantly be produced if you're detecting that. Now there are other things that can produce methane, such as volcanoes, so it mightn't be definitive, but we can maybe think that there's some characteristic chemicals that we can detect in those in the atmosphere. Um, if we just do it by the odds, the number of stars there is in our galaxy is about that many. Okay, but that's stars in our galaxy. If we then multiply that by the number of galaxies there are, which is actually roughly the same, that gives the total number of stars in our universe, if I count the zeros correctly. I think I've counted that right. Which is no other way of putting it, an awful lot. That is more stars than there are grains of sand on planet Earth. If we assume our solar system is typical and there's about 8 planets on each of those, that gives us about that many planets out there. And with those huge numbers, a large proportion of those planets are going to be, the conditions are going to be ripe for life. They're going to be the correct distance away from the star that it won't be too warm and it won't be too cold. The chemicals are going to be right there. So we just think as scientists, it's very likely there will be some form of life, even if it's just bacteria or plant cells, some form of life out there. Now, how can we detect that? Well, we've talked about looking for the chemicals in the atmosphere, but we can't send things out there. We're going to do, the next little video will be a calculation of how long it would take us to kind of get to other stars and other planets. We could go to the planets in our own solar system, but not ones around other stars. So what we do instead is we try and detect radio waves. So we think maybe if these aliens have the same sort of technology as us, they could be sending out signals into space, and we try to detect those signals. But as of yet, we have not heard anything from outer space.